Invisible Soldiers podcast.
Welcome to the Invisible Soldiers podcast. I'm Corey.
I'm Rebecca.
And we're your go-to podcast for Black conversations in advertising. This week, we discuss what happens when Black culture chooses sides. And we'll take a deeper look at some of the most divisive topics of the year. Joining us in this discussion is a longtime friend, comrade, and award-winning ad vet, Daidria Grayson. What up, Dage?
What up, though? Hi, friends.
Welcome back, Dage.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. For our listeners and watchers, you should know that Dage also is truly family for us. The three of us actually used to work in the same office 100 years ago. We have walked the same halls. We have fought the same battles with clients and creatives and strategists. I also wanted to take just a little bit of time to give you some flowers. Daidria, to me, is not only a colleague, but truly family. Like, I'm serious. Anytime I need anything, whether it's her big brain for some crazy marketing scheme that I might have, she's the one that I call. If it's, how can you help me out with my daughter who's just moved to New York, she will swoop in and pick you up in her dope-ass Lexus. But I wanted to let everybody know that from Campbell Ewald, from an account executive all the way to the VP of marketing at the Skim, building her own consultancy. She has worked on every brand from Chevy to Navy to McDonald's, and really truly brings award-winning, thoughtful ideas to every person and client and colleague that she works with. So I am just so pleased that you are here to share the time and to really get into these cultural discussions, because there isn't anyone we would rather do it with. So again, thank you.
Yes. And little known fact, when we were really starting this pod, she was our OG guest. When we were just trying to get reps and get people to like help us like practice, like she was our OG person that we called, and she did the first rep for us. So we appreciate that.
Thank you both. Thank you both. First of all, always humbled to, one, just be in the same space as you both, and also for you to even think of me to join the table in thought and culture. And I hope you both know how deep I feel for both of you. And when we talk about ad or creative or marketing or anywhere in that space, you two are standing names. So thank you for having me back, and I can't wait to have some fun.
Let's get into it then. So we're going to talk about choosing sides. Historically, there have always been these topics, personalities, things that happen in the culture that just fracture the culture, that make us choose sides. I mean, you know, from Malcolm and Martin to LeBron and Jordan to Beyonce versus every other Black female singer out there, right? Like these things, these conversations never stop. Where do you think these fractures come from, and why are we always choosing?
I would say, honestly, when I think about division, I always want to blame it on social media. I really do. I kind of, because we, as we both know, or all three of us know, honestly, coming up in advertising, we've had to fight for the whole idea that specifically Black people are not monolithic. And when we finally get the platform to choose sides, or honestly define who we are and reclaim our identity, then it comes associated with certain things, certain artists, certain politicians, certain ideas, values, etc. The list goes on. And but honestly, it becomes so polarized. Like, you're either A or B. It's never any nuance or anything in between. And so I think it's hilarious that we've arrived to this space where we're so intent on choosing and validating our stance on certain things that it really becomes a battle within the culture. I was also thinking, we even did it with Beyonce and her own sister. Remember when Solange dropped the seat at the table and everyone was like, well, I'm more of a Solange girl myself. And it was completely They literally came from the same womb. Like, what are you talking about? They look alike. Like, they're sisters. They're best friends. And so
I'm guilty. I'm guilty of that too.
Right.
Yeah, I've been in. Yeah.
I thought Solange, but also Beyonce.
But also,
yes,
and right. And we have. I don't know why we're so afraid of the yes and we choose the or. And I don't know if that's that division. Corey, you mentioned it perfectly with historically with Malcolm versus Martin, with Bayard versus Malcolm, and so on and so forth. But you know, now it's everywhere. It's in the food you eat. It's in the lifestyle. It's in the rapper you choose. It's in the in the show you watch. It's in the even in beauty, coming from the beauty space. It's the clean girl look versus the glam look. It's like
Hmm.
just I don't look the same every day. I don't. Some days I don't wear anything, but I have to choose. And so I want to blame it on social media, but you're absolutely right that we've always done it, and I think it's just now on a completely consumable level within because we're constantly scrolling and forced to make a choice.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the diversity of um, the lives lived by Black people. I mean, even you think back to like Booker T. Washington versus W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Like that whole thing, talented tent versus no, I'm gonna be a blue collar working man kind of a thing.
Yep.
And they both wanted the same thing for Black Americans, right? Progress, right? They just had two different kind of takes on it. So I think I think we're constantly calling in our personal lives, and I think the whatever lines up best with our personal narrative somehow. It might be black skin, darker skin versus lighter skin. It might be somebody who had it a little easier versus somebody who struggled more. But all these dynamics come into play every single time as we kind of make these choices.
It's true. And then how it plays out in a myriad of ways, like even thinking about Spike Lee and School Days, and it was wannabe versus jigaboo, this fraternity versus this fraternity. It is an interesting approach, even in our marketing in general, right? So like how culture shows up, specifically Black culture, because these are things I've been talking a lot about, is how Black culture shows up in general market spaces and ads, but with a differentiator between a multicultural shop where the people who are actually the thing make the creative, but then somehow our media is worth less when it is actually the OG. And even in the idea of deciding where you want to work, like we have these conversations all the time about like when it's time to return back to a multicultural shop because you might need a breath of fresh air from having to deal with difficult challenges that we face in general market spaces. So it does seem to be an or as opposed to a yes and. Do you think that we are in a position these days, just in terms of where we show up, and as Black people, we show up everywhere? Like I watch like all the reels, the dance reels. Like I don't know, I follow Snoop Dogg, who I adore, and he had posted a couple weeks ago these dancers from Tokyo, and they were doing uh, the dance historically that came out of the Crips and Bloods. So like how our culture gets placed into other spaces, but we seem to have to choose. Like, are we in a
Yeah.
place yet where we can embrace all of ourselves, or do we have to choose Kendrick or Drake?
I honestly think that Gen Z is getting us there, right? So I think that coming up, especially coming up in a city like Detroit, where you can see Black people of all lifestyles, you can see, different classes, you can see different professions, you can see so much diversity within the culture, and then, but you're still forced to choose. You're going to go the corporate track, or you're going to go military, or you're going to get that good government job, or you're going to go blue collar. Like it's only so many ways that you can go, and I think we as Gen X millennials have kind of been kind of indoctrinated in that way of living. Like we're kind of one dimensional in that way. But Gen Z, I did a PRFAQ, that's what it was called, stolen from Amazon for the skim. But I did it on Gen Z, and this generation, they're like, I want to be an astronaut and a nail tech, and I want to be a stylist, and then I'm a mathematician on the side. I'm tutoring kids. Like they're not choosing, and
All the things.
so they're
Yeah.
pushing everyone to embrace all facets of who you are. And I think that gives the rest of us permission to kind of reclaim some of that, even if it's not in our youth, to say, you know what, we're going to show up in different places and spaces. I mean, even in career choices as an advertising professional, as I think about my own career, I started in agency, started with you all, And then I moved over to brand, and then I moved over to publisher, and now I'm over on government. It kind of it's different steps, but 20 years ago, we would have had to choose and retire. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, we would have had to choose, stick to it. But I think the younger generations, the younger millennials and Gen Z, they're really like, you can't put me in a box. You can't say that I only belong in urban areas. You can't say, look at what Cowboy Carter, and how Beyonce was like, I'm a country girl. I always say that all of her albums are different parts of who she is. Black is King. She celebrated her blackness. Renaissance. She celebrated her family members, her beloved family members who are part of the queer community. And then now we have this country album of kind of responsive to the resistance of the community originally when she tried to step a toe in. And now she dropped the whole album and changed the game. But she really did lean into the younger Black, country artists that had already been fearless in trying to break down those walls. And so now country looks different. She gonna show up everywhere, and we're gonna follow, and we're gonna be there, and we're gonna buy all the merch, and we're gonna change the economy, and we're gonna fuel the economy. And now we have a place. So I think now we're starting to get to a point where it's like, yeah, you can't put baby in a box. I belong everywhere.
No, it's true. So Rebecca, you mentioned Kendrick and Drake. This has been one of the biggest discussions in a long time. And it has revealed a lot of interesting aspects that I haven't thought about in a long time. It immediately took me to Ben Johnson versus Carl Lewis, right? As Americans, I'm a track fan. As Americans, we always own the 100-meter dash. It was just like, it was our guy given right. We're gonna win 100-meter dash. Like that's it. And here comes Ben Johnson, this little pit bull of a man who beat our 100-meter champion, and it turned into like this Black Canadian versus Black USA thing. It was the first time I saw that dynamic in like the diaspora thing. Is was like there's two Black men, but then it's like but he's American, right? And I felt like a lot of that came out in this Kendrick Drake battle, and it became very aware that within this hip hop culture that is from the United States, that Drake is very tone deaf to what it is to be African American.
I would agree. I would 100% agree. I mean, one shouldn't choose sides, but I did Kendrick all day. Um, to that very point, it felt that the stories that he tells were very connected to my experience as an American, especially like I think rooted in the music itself. But I feel like even before the Kendrick and Drake, if you had rewound to like a month or two before that, Yasin Bey tapped into the Drake conversation and said that it was pop music, right? So like
Shopping music.
shopping
Shopping
music.
music, yeah, Target specifically, Target.
Right. And I do think that it's also like this battle of like owning our culture again. Like that's like what's really ours, controlling the narrative there and maybe giving it away for free or who reaps the benefits, not like us. I mean, if that wasn't a wow.
And it's still not over. It's still not over because we're still hearing it. We're still hearing it, and Drake is still being haunted by it for sure. It's funny about Aubrey. I call him Aubrey because anyone with origins is Wheelchair Jimmy on what was it, Nickelodeon. You gotta call him. You gotta recognize Drake as a stage name, and he's been a persona his whole life, right? And the other piece of this is when we talk about Drake's voyeurism to a certain extent by not being Black American. I thought about my freshman year at Howard and how we had, Detroit had a very strong pipeline to Howard. So, there was a lot of us on the yard, but you also had, students from the Northeast, from very affluent neighborhoods, from the West, from the South, from Atlanta, from Florida, from wherever. And, they're like, collard greens, what's that? I don't know what that is. Houston had a Vegas, but they could call the top. I've never watched Good Time. They will always make those comments.
Wow.
And we're like, Okay. But just, okay, if you haven't and you hear us talking about it, just go watch it. You don't have to declare. But it reminds me of Drake. It reminds me of, individuals within our culture who, also belong to our culture, but are not completely of the culture and specifically of the deeper aspects of our culture. And so I thought it was an easy shot to kind of, Rick Ross is calling him white boy and, you know, Kendrick pretty much, slayed him on verbally about, his biracial identity and all of this stuff, and that he has to call in the troops when he wants to get more black and really get credibility. But I also feel like there are people within our community that are the Drakes that have that have been positioned or in some ways have been raised in general market culture and miss those parts. I mean, I don't want to choose. Like, I think Kendrick won. Let me just say that for the record. It's recorded. It's documented here. Kendrick won for sure. But what Drake also won was he's petty, and I appreciate that from him. Imagine like Jay-Z and Nas beefing in memes in your IG stories. Like, imagine like Ether
I can't imagine
happening.
that. I
Can
can't
you
imagine
imagine?
that. No.
But like, talk about changing the game. Like, he like teased and picked and poked. That's the better word. Like, poked on Kendrick's shoulder in social media until he was ready to drop. And I was like, this is also on brand for Aubrey. He's always been petty. He's always made cheap shots. He's always been funny, and he's always been a little self-deprecating himself. Like, look, I know I'm not the full representation of the culture, but I'm going to run with it, while I have it. And I'm going to try to bring people along. So I think both of them have a place. I don't want to discredit one over the other, but yeah, Kendrick as a lyricist, Kendrick as an artist, Kendrick as, in both in theory and practice, just one.
Yeah. Moving on. Another hot topic. Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and it's interesting. A lot of the major supporters of Caitlin Clark happen to be former Black male professional sports players.
Really?
Who have really been very protective of her as like, I think they view her as like somebody who's carrying the burden of changing some of the dynamics because of the way she plays. It's a little different. She does a lot of outs. She's kind of like the female Steph Curry of the sport, and they are very protective of that. And then you see other people like, wait a minute. And like, we've seen more accomplished players, we've seen better players coming out, and they didn't get this attention. So it makes you really wonder why is her name such a hot topic? And I always go back to Angel Reese. The introduction to Caitlin Clark, I think, to a lot of non-basketball fans came through this beef. It was a Black woman versus a white woman. And I think not only culturally there's some division, but I think our nation has divided over this topic. And it's just really interesting to see it play out.
It was interesting to see it play out in media too. Like, even when the focus went to Dawn as like the OG in basketball, I'm not even going to say women's basketball. I'm just going to say basketball. We grew up with her as a pop cultural figure. She won her championship. She was in her moment. And then I just saw, I'll be honest, white media immediately shifting the attention to Caitlin Clark. And I was like, what? How did we get here? Like, and even Dawn made comments, right, in her speech about, Caitlin Clark's, performance. But that doesn't mean that this is Caitlin's moment. But somehow, some way, everyone just went and went over to Caitlin Clark. And I was livid, almost to the point that I almost posted under one publisher that I know and, that I've worked with in real life. Like, this is not okay. Like, you're totally skewing the story and taking the moment away from the person that deserves to shine. And to your point, Corey, I just think it becomes a bias. Our default is white.
Yeah. And for context, like for the people who, we're talking about Dawn Staley.
Yeah.
She coached the Division I women to a national championship undefeated. They win the championship against Caitlin Clark's team. But rather than being kind of celebrated as the champions as it normally goes, a lot of the attention went straight to the Caitlin Clark conversation.
Yep. That's
But I
exactly right.
find, but I find that isn't that usually the norm? Like I've seen it even play out in office politics, right? Like it becomes how, as a Black woman, do you shrink yourself a little bit more, not to overshine maybe this other woman that might be doing something? Like you are asked often to not be too celebratory about what just happened to you, or that you must be humble, right? Like there is a difference between like how loud it is, and again, not even like a comparison, but I'm often curious about the whole conversation around like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, like even how we go back and forth between how much shine Beyonce's allowed to have, like two albums, like really, and like where, right, and like that, like how, like the weight again, even in how our media is paid, like it is always a question of how loud or how shiny we are really truly allowed to be when we are clearly excellent.
So what was interesting to me is when we were coming up, we always rooted for the black coach in a championship, the black quarterback, whatever, right? But when you look down in the comments now, whether it's Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese, whether it's Beyonce, Taylor, it's a lot of black people saying, y'all haters. I'm team, Caitlin Clark. Y'all just hating on this girl. Or,
Mm.
I'm rolling with Taylor. I'm a Swiftie. Like y'all just hating. So that that is just unique to me because that was the first time that I had started to see, I say in the last 2 years, where I've started to see the fracture. Usually it was just like, I don't know, 95% black people chose black. We like Issa Rae. We rooted for black, right? Culturally. And now I see there's like another side now. There's like people rooting for black and there's people rooting for their, I don't know what some other beliefs that have kicked in. So I think that part is interesting too.
I also think that, again, going to the loved and hated social media, I think social media has created this invisible safety net for some of us to say, even, incognito, we're under um, these, um, these aliases, via our social media handles, and there might be an image of, a black person or someone who, identifies as black, in the avatar, but you don't. There are no repercussions for you to go under someone's, comment or post and say, actually, I do agree with so on and so forth. Like you're not going to see it the next day. No one's going to call you in the office. Your friends are not going to disassociate with you. That's your hot take. That's your moment in time to say this is what I believe. And of course, you still have the contrarians that are like, okay, well, let me hop in and just stir the pot a little bit. And I want to say the opposite thing, but I do think that it's given us, kind of even going back to the whole black people are monolithic, are not monolithic. I think it goes back to, it becoming a safe space to say, I actually agree. Now, what the principles you disagree or agree on are TBD, because sometimes it's like, well, based on what? Performance? Based on, I don't know what that is. Is it your own bias? In some cases, is it your own self-hate? I don't know. But in the same token, I think that that's where people find, our people especially find a little bit more safety in going against the grain and saying, actually, I think this. Um, and I also think, when it comes to Black women who are a lot more 360 with their presence, and when I say that, I mean, in the case of Angel Reese, you're a bomb on court, you are in magazines, you're on spreads, you got a presence on social media, you have your endorsements. In the case of Beyonce, you're in all genres. I do think that is not that it should be, because I love them both, but for some, and I feel like it's always been, even for us, sometimes we're too much, and that kind of saddens me in some ways. But that tends to play out in some ways too. With in the comments, we saw that with Amanda Seales. Amanda Seales always on 1,000 dots in that IG story. Like she gonna have a hot take on everything, a hot take, a long take, or whatever take on every single thing. And the moment that she was called out, everyone was like, "She too much. We can't. This is not a. She deserves it. We don't know what she did. She doesn't. She needs to stop talking so much." It's like, no, she doesn't. She can do whatever it is that she wants to. You don't have to engage, but that doesn't mean that we have to silence her, or we have to down her, or we have to say, I'm actually on the other side. She deserves this mistreatment by our own immediate. Like, that's just unacceptable. That was my take on it. But I do think that social media gives us that net to be like, I disagree just because there's no repercussions unless you say something really crazy and somebody finds out who you are.
It's true, and it makes you think about like what solidarity really means today, right? Like to your point, what you said earlier, Corey, even around whether it was track and field, whether it's like that Black American experience is so diverse right now that you can choose anything. But they're also, I guess, maybe like in terms of like our the thread that connects us all is I think also the thing like around like protecting our culture. I think that's what like Kendrick is talking about in terms of like keeping the thread. But I don't know if like when you say like, you could say whatever you want, is there even a desire for a full thread between Black America? I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with I think even Gen Z to know like from an identification, like I identify like really connected to my Blackness and what exactly that means. Like even thinking about when I went to Hampton, um, Dave went to the other HU.
I knew it was coming. I knew it was
You knew I was
coming.
gonna go there. You knew I was gonna go there. But like in the '90s, right? Like before technology, you went there and your experience was so based on where you were from. Like you knew you were from Detroit if you came because you were either wearing Rockports, you were wearing K-Swiss, you were definitely wearing Nautica. The guys were wearing khakis. Like you knew these brothers was from Detroit. If you were from DC, the girls had the cute little ascots. The first time I ever saw Timberlands and saggy socks from the dudes in Maryland, like was so you could really tell what kind of Black culture and like even the music coming up to the campus. Like somebody had to bring me a D'Angelo CD and we listened to it like second semester, right? But now it's like you can have that Black culture right in your phone. We're creating content all the time. But I'm curious to know for Black people, like, are we standing in our like solidarity? So like even like moving into how we support some and others, like moving into even thinking about like how P Diddy has fallen from grace, even though we all kind of knew he wasn't right, or like Bill Cosby, like, or like I still watch the Cosby Show, but don't tell anybody. But like, are we gonna listen to, P. Diddy stuff anymore? Like, how do we reconcile when our beloved people are held accountable, which is also a new thing that's happening too.
Well, Cat Williams, he called 2024 the year of it's going to be the year of truth coming out, So, and he basically has predicted, his interview set off all of this, right? And so I think right now, a common theme is you talk about that solidarity piece, Rebecca, and like there are Black people who want us to be united no matter what. And then there are Black people who are like, no, let's expose the jerks. Let's get them out of here. And we want all the truth to come out, right? And that, keeps popping up over and over, whether it's P. Diddy, whether it's, the Cat Williams interview, Monique,
Yeah.
So it just seems to be this recurring theme. I'm on the side of the truth. I just think that I think we've been falling, especially entertainment and Hollywood. It's giving culture and it's giving kids the wrong things to look up to. It's a facade. It looks shiny and perfect and money and fame and all of this stuff, and then you find out the real stuff. I just There's a documentary that came out on Netflix called Dancing with the Devil.
Oh, I saw that.
And it featured these young kids that we put in a TV commercial, right? And I didn't find out about this until the commercial aired. They got out of it was a cult basically. They got put into a creator's mansion, right? And they paid for costumes and makeup and music, and they shot all their videos. And meanwhile, they made them go to a church. They made them separate from their families. They started taking the money that they started earning once they blew up. So all that to say, like, I love it when the truth comes out. It exposes a lot of these kind of uh, a lot of these things that we think we want to chase, especially young kids think they want to chase, and then they find out the real deal too. That nothing is free.
Nothing
Do
is
you think
free.
do you think that it is different now? Like I will say, like I'm all about the truth. Like let's speak truth to power all the time. I love exposing all of those things. There was a time, I think, in history where it would be like if you heard it on the news, because we all used to watch the news at the same time, we were getting the similar stories, wasn't as segmented as it is now. But like you were always hoping that when they told you about a crime, God, please don't tell me
Yeah,
about that.
yeah,
Right? Like I don't see that so much anymore. Like it where it's like even in like our own there's no like us versus them as much as it is. And I think like that also part I think will play a part in how we vote this
Yep.
year. Again, where is that solidarity or what are we even needing or wanting? Even in talking about what's happened in our industry from 2020 to today, all of those promises that were made. And as we literally watch the laws change for diversity, equity, and inclusion, people being fired who are working on that work to hopefully push us forward. What are your thoughts around like again that like oh god I hope that person especially like with the Diddy falling off like how do we reconcile with our own truth as that comes out and does that like put like a film on our culture in general?
I I think we need to first, and maybe I got this from therapy, maybe not, but I think we need to acknowledge the first thing is that it hurts. Like it
Mm.
really hurts to know that someone who you grew up with, someone who even inspired you to take a certain career path or offered you an opportunity, the cost might be something else, as Corey mentioned earlier, but it hurts. It hurts to know that we've elevated this individual, even in some cases, knowing, the dark side of the engagement, if you will, or the journey. And now we're all watching them fall and we're all seeing at whose expense. I think what it also reminds us too, which is why we have some divisiveness in our community with certain individuals, is it reminds us where the power sits even within the community. So if it's at my expense that, someone like Diddy gets to be the representative of the culture, but come to find out he's voting against our interests, coming to find out he's, mistreating and abusing women, coming to find out, he has other very dark relationships, when it comes to trafficking, whatever that may look like, we can't have our power rest in that nest. We have to figure out a way to shift it, because the bottom line too is a lot of these individuals who are currently under the spotlight, they are, whether self appointed or appointed by us, they are representatives of the culture. When it's time to have real conversations about where we're headed, they're often invited to the table, whether it be for investment or as a mouthpiece. And so we have to be very selective about who they are. And when the truth comes out, to both of your points, we have to acknowledge it hurts, but we also have to accept it, and we have to figure out who that appointee or who those appointees are going to be. And I think we're in the midst of kind of figuring that out and being honest with ourselves, because how many people knew who Diddy was or who Bill Cosby was or whomever was R. Kelly, and because they were the one to reach that point, we had to be quiet. We had to let them rise because we didn't know how many more would be left. And now we see the full cost. We see the lives ruined. We see the hearts broken. We see those who died. In the case of Diddy, I mean, I always talk about his artists and how his artists fell on hard times. Like that. That's a legacy I would never want.
Do you remember about 4 or 5 months ago? There's this big story that came out about him giving the masters back to his artists. Do you remember this? Okay,
Yep.
so check this out. A huge part of that was to get their masters back. They all had to sign NDAs.
Oh.
So what we were really looking at was him getting ahead of the Cassie stuff.
A cover up.
Goodwill.
He was like, you know what? I'm gonna give y'all these masters. I'm gonna need y'all because the NDA said something like, you can never talk disparagingly about me, the label, things that have happened in the past, blah 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 blah. So all these people, they're like, oh, we get our masters back. They signed it. They can't be a part of any kind of suit now. Yeah.
I believe that. The power of the NDA too. I always wonder, just based on the number of power brokers who were always in his, in his presence or company. Like they have NDAs too. So who's Trump's? Like
Yeah.
Which NDA wins in the case of what can you say versus what you can't say? But I didn't realize that they had to sign an NDA, which will make total sense because Mace is chomping at the bit to tell everything, and he has not.
Not a word.
Not a word.
I bet Aubrey will though, because she didn't sign it. Yeah, she was like, I'm not signing it.
Well, she's been talking forever.
Yeah,
but she wants her. I won't say that, but she seems a bit. Not to say that there's no truth. I believe her 100%, but her brand, if you will, is one that is
attention seeking.
Yes. But again, that does not discredit the truth.
Right. And isn't that interesting too, when you do have people who sit on not a soapbox, but like they fashion themselves as truth tellers, like a Jaguar Wright, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, I'll be watching the YouTube videos because I'm
same.
Yes, online. You better, I'm in there. What does she have to say today? But like, I guess even in that, how it is received sometimes, and sometimes I also wonder too, is it bias because she's an aggressive Black woman and she's saying all these things, but like, I mean, she was on the road with all of these rap stars, and I have to tell you, like, rap stars on buses. I mean, like, so it's like, but we will say that she's crazy or she's got this or she's got that. So like, even breaking through to find out who is telling the truth, and to your point, Daidria, around acknowledging that it is so hurtful. Like, it still breaks my heart that Bill Cosby is a monster, because the work and the content that he produced for decades pushed our culture and our people to a place of excellence. Like, I would not have made it to Hampton University if it was not for the Cosby Show and for A Different World. Like, that opened my eyes to what it meant to be excellent, what it meant to feel confident in my own skin, that we could be future planning, like even thinking about where we are beyond what might be happening today, that Black people are doctors and lawyers, and it doesn't always have to be good times. Although great show, love it. First time I ever saw Black Jesus was on Good Times, but like, it does hurt. And I don't think that we've ever even really talked about like the healing journey as Black people around every time this happens. But I don't think it couldn't possibly be the last. I think the entertainment business in general breeds, unfortunately, abusive behavior. So it's like almost like being on a watch and praying that it's not someone that you knew or that you worked with or that they hired. The three of us work essentially in the business. It's just another arm of our culture in terms of where it sits in entertainment.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Agreed. I was going to build on that with, oh my gosh, did I lose my thought? Corey, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna, you brought up the word healing. Hurt it, how it hurt. So it makes me wonder, could these conversations be healing? These, actually publicly discussing why we choose sides, publicly going deeper into these conversations and really opening up and putting all of it out there. Are these conversations a good thing for us culturally?
I think so. I think we have to have the conversation in order to course correct, publicly. I think if we are going down a respectability politics like path, we never wanted to say anything because we can't be human. And part of being human is making poor choices and, and being part of that good bad spectrum, whether it makes us comfortable or not. And it does make us uncomfortable because the reality is we as a culture really don't have um, the runway for wrong, right? Think about the
Mm.
collective Black community prayer for Barack Obama. Like, Lord have mercy, let that stand too, and let the birth certificate be the biggest of his problems. And it really was, because of the thin sheet of ice he had to skate in order to get to where he was. And I'm still in awe of the fact that he and Michelle have been able to do that, even to this day, like coming
Yeah,
after
yeah,
both terms. And so the reason for that is because we knew that if something were to come, then will we get another chance? Will we be able to, climb those ranks again? And even Barack and Michelle, they've expressed in the book that they've written that even they carry a level of guilt. Like, did we do it too well? Like, maybe we should have, maybe there was something else that, maybe we could have represented a little differently, not necessarily do something, but like, how did
Mm.
we, crack the code on respectability a little bit better? But it wasn't even respectability. It was just, we know we don't have a very large margin of error. And I think with some of these cases that are coming to the forefront for us, where the discomfort is like, again, um, these were those who made it. These were those who won capitalism. These were those who, who opened the doors for others in the culture, and the changed a lot of things. And now that we're having these very open conversations about the dark side of it all, that's also uncomfortable too. But I do think we should. I do think, because they're watching anyway. I mean, we're leading the conversation. They're watching whether we do good, bad, indifferent. So we might as well have it.
So, thinking about maybe one last question that maybe ties it up in a bow. With all of this culture, specifically Black culture, and the work that we do, what do you think the lessons are for marketers in the time of something that's either hot or a yes and or this other? Do we capitalize on it? Do we own it? What do you think about that?
I would say these moments are reminders that whoever we choose to associate with, are not just brands, they're humans. I always have this thing against personal brands versus humans. I'm a human. Like, I don't have a brand book that follows me around. I don't have a voice, a tone. I don't have color choice. I mean, maybe black and white. I wear black and white all the time, except for today. But I'm a human. I'm going to fall. I'm going to fail. I'm going to make mistakes. Um, maybe there, every now and then a hot take might be a wrong take, to some, but um, I'm not always going to get it right. And of course the depth of that look different, especially when you're looking at someone at a macro level like Diddy, or, anyone else of the culture, or considers himself a cultural architect who is currently falling from grace. Um, but I think the key for us as marketers is just not to lean so heavily on personas or representatives of the culture when there's so much more richness in there. It doesn't live in a person. It lives in a community. It lives in everyday people. It lives in everything that we touch, everything that we say, everything that we do. And we don't have to get sucked into the razzle dazzle of the moment, because we are the moment. We've been the moment since we arrived. So this is just who we are. And I would say that would be my take on that.
And I think hopefully it makes a lot of people get a lot more serious about the strategy planning, right? Like the information is out there. You just got to do the homework. You got to get out there and talk to the people and really dive deep into the culture to find those nuances. We are not monolithic, right? We are very different. And if you push the wrong button through an ad, through an image, you could set off one of these cultural fractures, and it is not going to be good for your brand. So do the homework.
Do the homework. This has been an enlightening and inspiring conversation. We thank you, Daidria, for joining us.
Appreciate you.
Where can we tell people to find you and follow you and to experience how you see the world online?
Oh my goodness. Thank you both. Again, I can't thank you enough. This was so much fun. I can be found on Instagram at Daidria Grayson. I can also be found on LinkedIn at Daidria Grayson. And I hope that you both specifically continue to inspire me in how I tell my story. So thank you both for being those lights for me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in to another episode of Visible Soldiers podcast. Do us a favor. Listen, watch, follow us on YouTube and wherever you can hear podcasts. Until next time, peace.